So let's talk about appraisals. Okay, so essentially an appraisal is a professional saying this is what this property is worth today. So really what appraisals attempt to estimate is market value. So market value is really defined as what a willing buyer will give a willing seller when neither party are under duress. So that's really in its purest form what market value is, but the way it actually works ends up being a little bit different than that, because we often, say we list a house for $200,000 and we have a buyer who's willing to pay $200,000, that's great. You would think that demonstrates market value because here we have a willing buyer and a willing seller, but the buyer's not paying cash, they're getting a loan. So the bank's like, great, I'm happy to do this loan for you. I just need an appraisal so I know that if you don't make your payments, I can get this property back and I'm not going underwater because of it. So appraisals are really there to protect the lender most of the time. A buyer can order their own appraisal, but typically an appraisal is part of the process because the lender is requiring it. So the appraiser isn't just considering just the current state of the market. They're considering that, but they have to justify the purchase price of any contract with recent comparable sales. So generally, sales in a short area, if they can get within a half-mile or mile radius of the property, and generally in the last 6 months. Sometimes you can't find those, especially if it's a unique property. Appraisals can be challenging, but you have to consider not only the price per square foot, but the other homes that sold in the area, what they sold for, and ask the question, can this contract price be justified based on these comps? That's mostly what the appraiser is there to justify. So it can become a challenge when you have a hotter market and the buyers, maybe multiple buyers, are willing to pay more than that, but the appraisal, because there are not enough comparable sales, is not necessarily going to come in high enough. This is something that a seller has to consider when pricing a house, and this is something a buyer has to consider when trying to purchase a house. And even more, the stress is on when there's a multiple offer situation. So, a lot of times people ask, well, what's the appraisal on this house or that house? Generally, there hasn't been an appraisal done on any house until you have a purchase contract, unless you're talking about maybe the tax appraisal, which is a whole separate thing. There's really generally no relation between the tax appraisal value and the actual appraised value that will happen during a purchase contract. So the tax appraised value is a separate thing. The county is going to assess your home and decide how much tax they're going to charge you, and that's what that value is there to represent, and it's a separate thing from the appraisal that happens as part of a purchase contract. Often the values are drastically different, so it's really not something we consider. We, as real estate brokers, real estate agents, we consider both the recent comparable sales, but also the current state of the market, the inventory, the supply and demand, the available properties, putting ourselves more in the mindset of a buyer, saying, what do we believe a buyer would pay in this market? And that's getting a little bit truer to what real market value is, but we have to keep in mind that at some point an appraiser is going to come in and they're going to sign off on what they think the value is. So if the appraised value comes in lower than the contract price, generally the buyer is no longer obligated to pay more than appraised value, but the seller is not obligated to sell for less than contract price. So we're at an impasse unless we renegotiate. Either the buyer brings some extra money out of pocket or the seller reduces price. 90% of the time when that happens, we're able to keep the deal together one way or another. But that's just a general overview on how appraisals work. There's more nuance to discuss, but that'll get you started.